now, I think. Is that right, Anne?
You could just tell.
Yes, yep, so welcome everybody. As you can see, I'm not Marie. My name is Ann Bratton. I'm the logistics coordinator, and so we're really excited about our lunchtime learning today on understanding and coping with relapse and its effects. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, Joe. Thanks.
Okay, give me one more second just to make sure. Can you guys, what do you see right now on your screen? That'll be good.
We see your presentation.
Not the notes.
Nope. Nope.
Ah, and it's a miracle. That's great. Okay. So welcome everybody. This is Understanding and Coping with Relapse. It's affecting the treatment court team. This is not your average everyday course on incentive sanctions and treatment responses. It's not all about relapse in the context of VISTA. Although so for those who are like proximal and distal junkies, I promise you at least one slide on that, but it's not for the context that it usually has. Okay, we're going to look at this really from the perspective of what happens over time to a team. This is, in a sense, a team building session, and we're going to look at what we think relapse does to us as team members, and what it does to our team and its functionality, its ability to continue functioning at a high level, or perhaps to impact on its ability to function at a high level. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So it's an interesting subject, and one that's getting asked for more and more, especially as treatment courts have more longevity, number one. Number two, things like the opioid epidemic, which I'm sorry, but we all are dealing with. And I know in Tennessee, you're dealing with it especially heavy. I know that your numbers are you're like the third highest state with people who have overdosed and from opioids and or from fentanyl in particular. It's not an easy thing to deal with in any way, shape, or form, and yet deal with it we must, because if we don't deal with it, we're not gonna do well as teams, as human beings. We're not going to be able to stay in our jobs for long periods of time. There's going to be even more turnover than there may already be on your team. And you know what we really want to do is keep our team members, because once we get used to working with each other and we start to function at a higher level, we want to keep that going. When we lose a staff, we lose a team member, there's a whole readjustment time period, which we'll talk about a little later also. But we lose efficiency. We lose, in some ways, credibility as a team, and we don't want that to happen, right? So let's take a look at what we're going to cover. So we're going to cover we'll call the impact of recurrence, lapses on the treatment court team. We'll look at engagement and team member transference and countertransference. Okay, now those are two words. Yeah, if you're treatment, you've heard this before. If you're not treatment, you very well may not have heard before. It's two words that can bring absolute fear and terror to you, or it can make you think, oh, finally we're going to talk about this. This is great. This is stuff I've always been interested in. Transference and countertransference. At its simplest, it's when a participant is in front of you, whether is in front of you as a treatment provider, so they're sitting maybe in a chair or they're in a group, or if they're at a status hearing and you're there at the status hearing with you, which I hope all of your team members would be. Who do you see in the chair or standing in front of you? And sometimes you see the participant, and sometimes the participant reminds you of somebody very important in your life, usually from a younger time. So you have transference, which is what the participant is seeing in you, because they're looking at you, by the way, and having a similar chemical reaction to them. So you've got transference, countertransference. Really interesting stuff. Doesn't get talked about much. We're going to look at it in terms of team building. Vicarious trauma. Another one, you can notice a certain pattern here. And the pattern is these are all aspects of our work that we can ignore or not at our own peril, or I should say at the team or our peril, right? They're all there. Many of them are invisible. They occur. We tend not to like to address them because they're difficult, because they bring up the feelings word. I hate to say that, but when you talk about feelings, it's not always easy to go there, get in, get out, right? I promise you though, what I won't do is open anything up that I can't close up for you in our hour and 15 minutes together. You're welcome to ask questions as you'd like, anytime, and I'll just pick them up as we go. Or you'd like to hold on to them towards the end, please feel free to do so also. Okay. So for those who don't know, NADCP has changed its name. We just had our conference, and this was a big part of the conference. I was involved a little bit in the process of changing this over and creating a mission and vision statement, which you'll see our new ones are down at the bottom. I think the most important thing for you to know is we're still NADCP at our heart. We've simply evolved. We felt it was time to have a name that meant what we were and where we were going in the future years. So our 4 divisions, 3 of them have changed names. One has stayed the same. So NDCI, which is where I'm a department director, or I'm a deputy. No, oh boy, I'm a deputy dog is what I am right now. Where I'm a project director. Aha, got it. I'm one of the project directors at the Treatment Court Institute. We've got a change in name for Impaired Driving Solutions now as a division. Justice for Vets is the one that stays the same. And then we've got a new Center for Advancing Justice. All Rise is the training, membership, and advocacy organization for justice system innovation, addressing substance use and mental health at every intercept point. Okay, that's a well-crafted message. Had nothing to do with exactly that, but I like it. I think it's really good. And it also gives us, in many ways, room to grow and to look forward. So tell me, what is the goal of treatment courts? Is it sobriety or recovery? And you can feel free to raise your hands electronically. That would be great. Raise your hand if you think it's sobriety. Okay, raise your hand if you think it's recovery. It's like fireflies. They just kind of appear on the screen. Someone's clapping too. Thank you, Carla. Okay, so what is the goal of treatment courts? Recovery. Yeah, so sobriety's a smaller piece of the larger recovery pie, right? And I think that we have to remember that. It's worthwhile keeping that in mind, especially as we go on this year to talk more about terms such as harm reduction, which have been uncomfortable and difficult to talk about in the past, and which we're going to talk about more as we go through. And I see for those of you who put in the chat box, recovery, recovery, recovery. Yeah, I like that. All right. So we are looking at the bigger picture, the larger context, right, as opposed to the individual act of sobriety. So let's take a look at a paradigm, a model, which I find useful, because we're talking about a lens of substance use disorder in the work that we do. And if we're talking about what's the impact of relapse, we got to see how relapse fits into this picture and how it impacts us and where we are in the picture of the culture of drug treatment and the culture of criminal justice, because those really are our two pieces together. So we've got the culture of drug treatment, which we are, whenever we meet at, whether it's status hearings or staffings, we have a mix of at least two cultural groups, one of which is drug treatment and one of which is criminal justice. For us, two key elements are this image of addiction and recovery. So this is NIDA's definition of addiction: a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. So addiction is also called substance use disorder, and we've got moderate, severe, and low, moderate, severe. Yes, I probably got the first one wrong, but I think you get the sense of it, right? We've got three types of substance use disorder that you can be diagnosed with based on how you answer, how you're assessed over 11 questions in particular. And we'll give you a diagnosis of substance use disorder at either a severe or moderate or a lower level. And of course, our folks in treatment court are either at a moderate or heavy or severe level, which is sometimes called addiction. We're still using the term addiction, by the way. We are not using the term addict because it has a significant negative impact on our participants when we use it. So some language issues to be aware of. You'll notice also, I'm not going to use the term relapse so much as I am going to use the term recurrence. And another term, which is lapse. So these are terms that are coming more into favor simply because of stigmatization and what's worked and hasn't worked in the past. So then recovery, we're talking about a process of change. So addiction is a chronic relapsing disorder, right? Brain gets hijacked. You continue to use despite harmful consequences because you can't seem to stop yourself. It creates long-lasting changes in the brain when you are diagnosed with a moderate to severe substance use disorder. It takes time, months, if not a year or years, to change those, the damage, to undo the damage. Most of that kind of damage can be recovered. That's what recovery is all about, right? It's the process of change, which we improve our health, wellness, live self-directed life, and strive to reach a full potential, all of which connects to the term addiction by trying to heal the brain so that you can take control over your life once more. So I think that concept is important for us. So we've got this term substance use disorder, moderate to severe. We've got this term recurrence or lapse. So we're not saying relapse anymore. I know it's going to be hard to get out of our language. I seem to be stuck with it at the moment, and I'm working with it. But recurrence means what we used to call relapse. So how often does relapse occur? What do you think? How often does it occur? And you can feel free to open your mic and just tell me. What percentage of people do you think relapse? At least once.
100%?
You got 100. Anybody else?
50%.
50. Okay, so now we got 50. We got 100. I got somebody who put on the board 70%. I don't hear anybody saying 0. Why is that? And you can feel free to answer through your microphone.
I guess I personally don't know anyone in recovery who has not had at least one relapse.
Yeah, and I think that's, someone just wrote it's the nature of the illness. Yeah, it is. Does that mean nobody goes through without a relapse? No, but the number tends to be relatively small. We have someone like Carl Dawson, who's got a practice with a treatment court as a treatment provider. He's told me that he has, in his practice over the years, at least 5 recurrences prior to recovery. Prior to recovery, at least 5 recurrences prior to recovery that occur. I've got numbers for relapse for treatment court participants, at least 40 to 60% relapse at least once. And then of course we've got things like drug overdose deaths, which go along with that relapse, right? Tennessee, drug overdose deaths were already on the rise in Tennessee, but COVID really put you guys over. Unfortunately, it put a lot of folks over, but it especially impacted your communities and around, for example, Louisville and up towards the border. It's contributed to the most significant 3-fold 10-year increase in drug overdose deaths in recent memory. And your Tennessee ranks 3rd in the country for prescription drug abuse across all demographics. I always like to look at a little bit of the specifics to see how folks are doing. You're having a rough time. And the specific opioid that's been really harming you the most is fentanyl. Hard to see when it's in your substance. Super powerful. Easy to overdose on, and not only overdose, but to die from. Overdose have shifted from Caucasian or young adult white populations to people of color, men and women, Black and brown. Right? There's been a shift in this also. So we've got a lot of demographic shifts of loss, right? We've got a lot of shifts of loss around changes in substances that are being used, and that's when there's loss, there's going to be problems, and that is something to keep in mind. So we just mentioned COVID. We've got trauma from COVID. I would guarantee that everyone who's been born since COVID began and or who's alive since COVID began has experienced at least one kind of trauma, whether it's a moderate to severe trauma. It is not what I'm going to count. What I'm going to say is trauma has occurred. We've lost a whole generation of older adults to COVID, and that all by itself is upsetting. So we've got a lot of folks who've lost grandparents, great aunts and uncles, parents, of course, children also. So we've got COVID, which you can say is over, but its impact is still with us. Right? We can say it's over, but its impact is still with us. And the trauma that occurred before, if it hasn't been addressed, it's still impacting on us. And it definitely impacts as stress upon a team's functionality. Every training I go to, I always ask how many people have had an overdose or a death from overdose sometime within the last year. And there's never a group that has nobody raise their hand. So let's keep that in mind. So we've also got the criminal justice culture. So sometimes these work together on our teams and sometimes these don't. It's the hardest part of mixing cultural groups from a team building perspective, right? We've got our criminal justice team members. We've got our treatment court team members. There's not an equal sharing necessarily of power. And because of that, it creates problems for us. We've also got political protest and the political violence that's occurred over the last 6 years. This is being realistic, but what I see here is this purple cloud surrounding our attempts to move folks from addiction to recovery. impacted by cultural issues that are in occurrence. Things like relapse, which is part of the substance use disorder recovery process to deal with. We've got outside illnesses like COVID and trauma from the opioid epidemic. We've got political protests, which has made it more difficult for us to do our work. And we've got stigma around opioid overdoses, very, very specifically. And this stigma impacts on all the work that we do. There's stigma around substance use disorder, there's stigma around opioid use. So there's actually two stigmas. There's double the fun, right? When it comes to stigma regarding opioid use and overdoses. So this all creates a significant amount of stress, right, which makes us ask, how does it impact on work performance? How does it impact on work performance for our team? Well, quite simply, it brings out things like implicit bias, which are much more likely to manifest themselves in an atmosphere of high stress. It means that we will make knee-jerk reaction decisions. We will make quick decisions, which are not necessarily well thought out or as well thought out as they should be. Implicit bias occurs because we get 40 million bits of information kind of flowing through us in all the sensory ways that we have possible through our five senses, right? Got 40 million bits of information going, assaulting us, you could say, through that purple cloud. The problem is we can only deal with and address and understand about 40. So 40 versus 40 million. What that means is a significant amount of this information is going to be addressed on a quick basis. And it'll be based on information that we've been taught since we were born, since society has taught us, and biases are taught, right? So implicit biases are more likely to manifest, help us to make, unfortunately, biased decisions many times. When if we could have hesitated, thought a little longer about it, could have made better. Vicarious or secondary trauma, as we've been talking about, we'll give it names, but those two terms, vicarious and secondary trauma, impact on us because of the loss that's occurred over this time. Compassion fatigue is also another term that comes up. A lot of what we do is listen to, hear stories of suffering and pain. Yeah, that's what we do, right? Treatment listens to all the things that have happened to our participants, their clients, probation, police officers, listen to stories of what's happened, whether it's to witnesses or to our participants. And then we hear them again and again and again, right? And that buildup over time is traumatic, right? Things like vicarious or secondary trauma move that way. So they build up over time, the impact on our perspective, they create health issues, heart attack, stress-related issues, anxiety. So these are things that impact on us and our team and our ability to get our work done. All right. So what do we need to do? Well, we got to seek our own stress relievers. So we're going to have to look at wellness approaches to our work. In the past, we have not done so very often. And what I'm going to tell you is, if you haven't done so yet, you need to do so now. Just look at how many people you've lost over the last year, as far as team members are concerned, and then think about what the reasons are for them leaving, right? So we have to find stress relievers to make sure that we can continue to make not implicitly biased decisions, but fair decisions. We want to reduce the impact on biases, not increase the impact of biases. So these are the 4 areas we're going to look at: countertransference, recurrence or lapse, vicarious trauma, and team wellness, and how that's going to kind of pull together everything here. So you guys probably seen these before. This is Slido. I'm going to ask you to take out your phones. You've got a QR code up in the left corner of your screen. And if you can just click on that, it'll, if it doesn't work for you with the QR code, look at slido.com, go right there and join it with a hashtag 3703419. But as soon as you get there, it'll give you there we go, 3 participants typing. When a treatment court participant relapses, I feel, give me a 1-word answer. When a treatment court participant relapses, I feel. I told you I'm going to ask you a couple of stuff about feelings. Here's one, right? We got 23 some odd people. You can vote more than once if you'd like, but I want to see if we can get all 20 folks to give us something. And what this is a word cloud. And word clouds give you words bigger. So words get bigger as they get chosen more. So for example, the word bad is up there, but it's very small. Discouraged is very big. Probably discouraged has been picked by a significant number of you. Sad and disappointed, helpless are also up there. Multiple people having chosen them. Let's get one more. One person's typing, so let's get one more up there. Okay, so what we end up seeing is we've got discouraged, disappointed, helpless, sad. Those are our big 4. Right? You've also got defeated. We feel bad, feel stressed, we feel frustrated, curious, responsible to get them help. Responsible probably all by itself is a big word. You've got helpless. So what do we notice about how you feel regarding participant relapse? When a participant relapses, what do we notice about how we feel as team members of treatment courts? And simply undo your mic and just let's speak this through. Tell me, what do you notice about our word cloud?
Like it's our failure too, like we're at fault for it.
Yeah, so would you say we take this personally?
Yes, we all do.
Everyone take a breath and exhale. Yeah, we take this very personally. We invest in people based on their stories, right? And it's hard not to. Treatment providers know this because they've been doing it for a long time. Probation knows this, right? Because you guys have been doing this a long time. We all get different parts of the stories. That's the power of the multidisciplinary team. But I think that we forget, if you're not used to dealing with a high-risk, high-needs population as part of your main work, you forget how challenging it can be, number one, and number two, how much we take it to heart, the work that we're doing, right? So I've asked this question many times. So what do you do when a participant relapses? One of the first places I did this was upstate New York. And they had asked for the course a number of years ago. And I asked them, what do you do when a participant relapses? And the person raised their hand, and this is what they answered. We do a case autopsy to see how we failed the participant. Just sit with that for a moment and think about it. Powerful words, autopsy. I couldn't get past that. I stopped there. We do a case autopsy. And then of course, when I finally did go on the second day, I looked at failed the participant. Right. So it's not just going on in Tennessee with the 20 some odd folks who are in this virtual room. This goes on with treatment court providers and team members all over the country and in other places, other countries. Right? We take it personal. We get attached. We want our jobs to succeed and to feel competent. And part of doing that is getting people to graduation, helping them to stay sober, helping them to move into the larger concept of recovery. Right. Do a case autopsy to see how we failed the participant. So let's go a little deeper on that then. So we've got some definitions that I think are useful for us. Let's remember that relapse or recurrence, as a new term that we're using today, is what we call an unfolding process, in which the resumption of substance use is the last event in a long series of maladaptive responses to internal or external stressors or stimuli. Wow, that's a mouthful. What it basically means for our purposes, thank you, NIDA, for that definition, but nevertheless, unfolding simply means that it occurs over time. It doesn't, usually when relapse occurs for us, many of us are surprised. Some of us are not. It all depends upon what our relationship is on the team with the participants, and what perspective we have, what we were able to see and or not see. So unfolding process means that it goes step by step. And it's the last event in a long series of steps of maladaptive, simply meaning steps that maybe used to work, right? Used to help calm you down. So you have a glass of whiskey. Used to help you to get to a good place so that you could deal with all the things that were going right and wrong with your life, because feelings come up whether things are going well or difficultly, and feelings can be difficult to deal with, right? But then they're no longer working. Those things aren't working anymore. And so if we fall back to them, it makes sense that we would, right? That we would use what used to work and what has worked. If we have a severe substance use disorder, what used to work for us was substance use, right? Having another drink, shooting up one more time, using fentanyl, using cocaine, whatever the drug, alcohol, whatever the drug was that worked for us, we go back to it again and again. That's the well that we keep going back to. Abstinence violation defect. There's a lot of different definitions of it, but one definition in particular I think is useful for us because it's not used. It's interesting for us from a team perspective. What I've heard it called is when a client who we're working with, a participant who we're working with, feels like they've disappointed the counselor, the recovery team, the treatment court team, like they've disappointed us so badly through their relapse or through their recurrence. They feel like they'd rather go to jail than face us and tell us that they failed. So we take this pretty seriously, but at a certain point, our participants also take this pretty seriously. And you know when that switch kind of occurs, it doesn't occur 1 week into a program as a participant. It doesn't take 1 month into the program, but maybe at 3 months, you might see some of it. 6 months, much more likely. Right? The longer you're in treatment, the better you tend to do. The longer you're in treatment, the more likely you are to get to graduation, because you start to see things that you didn't see, you weren't able to see before, if treatment's working. So let's remember also that when we talk about, so we want to have appropriate context for the term recurrence and slip or lapse. A lapse or a slip, we're not just gonna say relapse as one term. We now have recurrence or a lapse or slip. So we've got two pieces of this pie, right? An isolated incident of use occurs once, doesn't result in a return to old using patterns. Let's recognize that just as relapse is incredibly common, recurrence is incredibly common, so also are lapses or slips, just as common. So you could say that a lapse or a slip is like eating, okay, let's say you go get an Entenmann's box of chocolate chip cookies. I don't have any stock in Entenmann's. Nevertheless, they have good chocolate chip cookies. If you only eat one and then it's not a problem, then you have a slip or a lapse. On the other hand, if you eat the whole box, we've got a recurrence. All right, so notice the difference between these two things. This can help us to deal with the concept of doing a case autopsy, having to do a case autopsy to see where we failed the client. Because if we look at every relapse as if we need to do a case autopsy to see how we failed the client, we are not going to be around that long in treatment court, because that's heavy. We want to make sure that we can address those with a realistic context. Realistically, recurrence occurs, but realistically also a significant number of recurrences are lapses or slips. So we want to make sure we find out what those mitigating circumstances are. What happened here? What's the list of events that we were able to pull together and see? Who saw them from which perspective? What did treatment see? What did probation see? What did the police see who are out in the field, watching people in the community? Right? This is all going to be helpful. So some more context for you to help you kind of cushion the way we look at recurrence. So there's a whole list of scientists, Marlo and Gorski in particular, who have done since the 70s all kinds of great work on relapse, which again we're now calling recurrence. And they say that there are three types of clients. There are those who are prone to recovery, those who are prone to relapse, and those who are chronically prone to relapse. So you'll notice this is an older paradigm, so it uses the term relapse. But I kind of like this because it helps me to see everybody in at least three different positions, right? One is that they're prone to recovery. So some folks come in, they have a severe substance use, moderate to severe substance use disorder, but they have a lot of things in place, a lot of people, places, and things in place to help them. They have significant recovery supports that are in place. Some folks are prone to relapse or prone to recurrence simply because they don't have any recovery supports in place. They don't have people, places, and things that are going to help the recovery process for them. And then, of course, you've got those who are chronically prone to relapse, which as dealing with high-risk, high-need individuals who've been diagnosed most likely with severe substance use disorder, our folks are mostly right there. Right? So chronically prone to recurrence means that we're going to be spending a lot of time with them. We're going to hear a lot about their stories. We're going to get frustrated as all heck. But when we succeed, it's also going to feel tremendously good, right? Sticking points in recovery, two sticking points, good to keep in mind. One is lack of skill. The other is lack of self-confidence, or the concept of self-efficacy. The belief in the ability to succeed at any individual, any specific thing. So let's also keep those in mind. Our folks need to have enough skills, be able to add to their ability to be able to get support and support themselves in the process of recovery. And they also need confidence. They need the belief in themselves. And so many of our participants, right, don't have that. They don't have self-efficacy. Or if they do have some, it's very low. So they don't believe that they can get the job done for themselves. And they've probably been told that their whole lives. Yeah. So is abstinence a proximal or distal goal. Now, more context: high risk, high need individuals, moderate to severe substance use disorder, and out of left field comes the terms proximal and distal. Just hang in there with me for a moment. Proximal tends to mean, let's remember that you're capable of doing it. So you're capable of not having a relapse, for example, but not when you first get into treatment. When you first enter a treatment program, abstinence is what we call a distal or a far off goal. It's simply not going to be that easy. And it's because of what we just talked about, how difficult it is to not use when you're in treatment, especially the first, I'd say 3 to 6 months, when most of the relapses occur. So if we put everybody into jail who relapsed within the first week of being in treatment court, we'd have a lot of folks in jail, and that would be an absolutely worthless behavior for us to be engaged in, because it wouldn't do anything, right? It would be too harsh. So distal goals, things like abstinence, are going to be hard to achieve. To admit, for example, that you have an addiction is going to be hard to do. These tend to be harder. That's why we call them distal. Proximal goals, things like being honest, showing up to treatment, drug tests, court, being on time, just trying to do something, right? You may not make it to a drug test on time, but maybe you get there in time, right, before they close up. So these are things we tend to be capable of, but just because we're capable of it doesn't mean that we can do it or that it's going to be easy. So notice the term easier. So it's not easy, it's easier, as opposed to something being both hard and harder than these over here. So knowing that people go through time periods in our treatment program, that the more time they spend in treatment, the more likely they are to succeed and to put days together in a row of sobriety is worthwhile for us to know. When people start, it's much harder. Lots of relapse occurs. As they get towards graduation, it's much easier. Easier. That's our term. That's our proximal and distal language. So this is just to bring it home. Key timeframes. And notice, for example, that from JAMA 2020, drugabuse.gov, NIDA, there's 3 bars right there. One is substance use disorders with 40 to 60% recurrence or relapse. And you've got hypertension, 50 to 70% relapse, asthma, 50 to 70%. So lots of chronic illnesses come up basically the same way. They're very hard to treat behaviorally because it's hard to change behavior. And especially when you're using a substance that changes the way you act, the way you think, that makes it harder for you to make clear decisions. And especially when you have more stress on you, which, as we've talked about already, we've got the purple cloud surrounding us, right? So notice key timeframes. 1 month. So 1 month, you start to see changes, small ones. 3 months tends to be a good marker for relapse and recurrence starting to slow down. 6 months is a very big marker. You'll notice when you see charts about recurrence that there are significant drops in recurrence at around the 6-month mark. 1 year, again, more significant. Of course, 5 years, even more. So our folks are leaving anywhere between 1 and 3 years along there, 24 months, 18 months, 26 months, right? Notice this is increased or decreased depending upon what the substance is. Some drugs are just simply harder to kick than others. So heroin, you notice the relapse rate is 78%, alcohol 68%, cocaine 62%, opioids 91%. Then you've got 59% relapse within the first week, 80% within a month post-program. So these are all from the American Addiction Center's drugabuse.com sites. And the numbers don't change. These are the numbers for the substances that we have. What can change the numbers in a way is treatment, right? But we're still up against these time frames. So in order to be able to address relapse in a realistic way, address recurrence in a realistic way, we have to have the context of what relapse means for substance use disorder. Right? So this is a rough one to see. It's from 2004, the Co-occurring Center for Excellence. It's an overview paper on consensus and evidence-based practices for clients with co-occurring disorders. I put it in here because a group of researchers decided that they could actually say this out loud. In general, psychosocial interventions, which by the way are exactly what we use predominantly in treatment, have a weak to moderate effect. Repeat episodes appear beneficial. Specific individual response to treatment is not assured. There is no magic bullet. All right, just breathe through that for a little bit. What does it mean? It means that we use interventions that are not magic bullets. They take time. It's not one session and done. Repeat episodes tend to be beneficial, meaning you do level 1, you do level 2, you do level 3. The manuals are not short. The manualized interventions are long, right? They're 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. Some go longer. There are short interventions, which can be useful too, but usually a combination is going to be what's useful for folks. The idea that repeat episodes of care appear beneficial, that you can't tell how someone's going to do in treatment until you get them in treatment, but it does help to have treatment that is validated for different target groups. If you have a treatment program that's not validated for success with women, then sending women to that program is not going to be good. It's not going to be successful because it's not a validated treatment method for the individual. So gender-specific programs like HEAT, which is specifically made for African-American and Black young men. That's going to be more successful for that target population because it's made specifically for it. So the more you titrate, or the more you tailor your treatment program, your treatment to the needs of the individual, the better you're going to do. We know this, right? We know this. The more you tailor the program to individual needs, the better you're going to do. The more likely you are to get them to graduation, more likely you are to get them through the sticking spots, right, on those timelines that I just went through. So the other thing for context, and then we're going to move forward into the other 3 areas, is this is a piece from Marlowe and Gorski, which I really like. It's on a developmental model of recovery. What I like is just, again, to remind us what the context is of recurrence for our folks. When do we let folks out of our program? When do they tend to graduate? 1 to 3 years is probably where we would say, right? So are they leaving us in middle recovery? No. Are they leaving us in late recovery? No. Are they leaving us in maintenance? To use the stages of change term? Nope. Right? They tend to leave us not in transition, but usually stabilization and maybe early recovery. That's when our folks tend to leave us. So if we look at things that way, it can be useful for us to be able to cushion what happens when we hear that, for example, one of our participants who's been gone for 5 years at a treatment program, we find out that they overdosed on fentanyl. And we ask ourselves, but they left our program, graduated, they were ready, right? Well, 5 years is working into late recovery maintenance, and it depends on what kind of aftercare they were involved with, what kind of supports they had, all those things. So we want to leave people stable and in early recovery with the ability to work and to support themselves and to get support for themselves. Right? Developmental model of recovery. So here's first suggestion, just think about this for a moment. We work in very much a sense with a failure paradigm. We have recurrence and lapse. When it does happen, usually the first thing that people ask to treatment team members ask is, why did you lapse? Why did you relapse? Why did you have a recurrence? What did you do? Right? That's a failure paradigm. That's what's wrong with you, right? And many times that's because we're angry, we're upset. You know, why did you do that? What I want to do is see if we can turn this around. And if you've got someone who has relapsed, they're relatively new to the program, and it's 1 month in, 4 weeks, and they relapse, instead of saying, why did you relapse? We know why they relapsed. They're 1 month in. Who knows what else could have occurred? Just the fact that they're 1 month in the program means that the odds of relapse is pretty high. Instead, what we should focus on is what I call a success paradigm. So this is a good thing just to think about how we address what we say when someone has a recurrence. What I like to think of is, what did you do that helped you to stay sober for 4 weeks? And maybe the person didn't stay sober for 4 weeks. Maybe part of the deal is they've relapsed 4 times, once a week, every week for 4 weeks. So what I would do is go to the last week. What did you do for the last 7 days that helped you to stay sober between the last recurrence and this one? Even if it's only, what did you do for the last 24 hours, the last 12 hours, right? We've got folks who have a severe substance use disorder. They're needing to use on a regular basis, or they're going to be in pain. So finding out what they did to stay sober, what was helpful for them, what worked, and focusing on what worked can also be really useful. Strengths-based approach, right? So it is a great phrase. Recurrence or lapse is a part of recovery, right? We say that it's a part of recovery, but it's not apart from recovery. Just think about that. Spend 2 hours coming up with that one. So personal reactions to recurrence or lapse. 2 of the mitigating factors are countertransference and what we call dual relationships. And then we'll cover vicarious trauma. So let's take a look at these 2 areas. Let's look at countertransference. Transference, I call them mitigating factors because they can heighten our reaction to participant recurrence or relapse, or they can make it less. They can heighten it or lessen it. Remember, when we talked about countertransference, transference is what the participant feels or has in their personal background that makes them think of you as someone from their past, and they react that way. What countertransference is the opposite. It's what we feel towards our participants, and it can heighten or negate reactions that we may have. So transference, total emotional response of the client to the counselor with consideration to the entire range of conscious, preconscious, and unconscious beliefs, attitudes, and feelings. Whoa. Okay, that's a lot. That's a big feelings fireball, right? So what is countertransference? It's counselor to the client, just as we said. So what does it mean, transference then? Well, it's chemical. It's person to person. It can be both positive and negative. It's always occurring. It's never not occurring. By the way, it's normal. And then there's one of my favorite phrases: if it's hysterical, it's historical. Usually when we meet somebody, did you ever meet somebody and have like a chemical reaction with them? Like you just liked them right away, or you just disliked them right away, and you couldn't figure out why. But maybe you were just talking and all of a sudden you just kind of hit it off. Or you saw somebody and met them and you just thought, oh, I don't like this person. I don't even know why. They didn't even say anything, but there's something. Right? So you notice these things, if they're big and usually noticeable, it usually has to do with somebody from your past. usually from your formative years. Yes, that usually means mom, dad, whoever took care of you, family, friends, usually from when you were a child. So here's a little reflection activity. I want you to think for a moment of a drug court participant. No names, please. Right? No names. Just think about this first. Think of a drug court participant that you had a reaction to that was out of proportion, either an over or an underreaction when they relapsed. You could even say when you first met them, was there an over or underreaction? Whether it's because of a relapse or recurrence or not. So looking back, what do you think happened? Why did you over or underreact? Could transference have been an issue? So take a moment and put down some thoughts on this, on whether this has happened to you, what you think about it. What was an overreaction or an underreaction? Got some folks who are typing. So dishonesty. Sometimes we can think somebody is dishonest simply because they're, if you smell, for example, the cologne that someone's wearing or aftershave and it reminds you of your father and you had a challenging relationship with your father and he was always lying to you, you can see how this can react or create a reaction with you, not believe what somebody says, feeling let down. So someone invested a lot of time and resources in someone. So if you overreact, right, and you really connect with somebody and you put a lot, so what do? Well, you probably put more effort into them than someone who, for example, you have a negative countertransference with. And so you get disappointed. It's more stressful. And this goes back to our original concept. So the more stress you have, the harder it is going to be to do your job, right? Without, for example, bias and other problems getting in the way. We've got a couple more, so let's just finish them up. Felt familiar to neglect from an ex-partner. Yeah, we're talking about stuff that sometimes can be very painful. Many times, for example, for me, I tend not to see countertransference, but for example, my partner, my wife, might tell me, she's like, don't you see? That person looks just like your mother, or she acts just like your aunt, or spitting image of your grandmother, or a vocal pattern that's just like your grandfather. And of course, depending upon whether my relationship was positive or negative, you can see how this could impact, right? Impact on the development of a positive relationship with a participant. And of course, they got nothing to do with it. They just are who they are. So they didn't do anything. What we need to do then is figure out when that happens, or listen when someone else tells us. Usually, as I said, it's usually a friend or a colleague who knows you well enough to see that. And even if they don't, recognizing when someone over or underreacts to somebody, when they have a very strong over or underreaction to somebody, usually it's transference. So you want to make sure that that's not causing harm. Excellent work, folks. Excellent. So some of the effects of negative transference, you can encourage the participant to act out. You can disengage from them unconsciously and not realize that you're just stepping away. You may say you have no feelings at all. You just don't show up to staffings when they're being covered. You don't show up to status hearings, miss meetings with them, you're late so that you don't have to cover or deal with the issues that they're dealing with. Non-neutral interventions, non-equitable interventions, incorrect interpretations of participant behavior. Well, they're clearly violent. They got in a fight in the lunchroom today. So I think we need to get them out of here. Right. But if they're 4 weeks in or 2 weeks in and they got in a fight because they've got all kinds of feelings that they're dealing with without having to use a substance, maybe we ought to look at that, right? Incorrect interpretations of participant behavior. And then acting out or inappropriately making comments to a participant. So if you say something you really shouldn't say to a participant, as if you know them too well, right? So possible effects of positive transference. Difficulty establishing or maintaining boundaries. You tend to overdo for people. And this happens to us a lot. But positive transference, or countertransference in this case, means it can be really hard to set boundaries. If you're not used to setting boundaries, treatment sets boundaries all the time. That's a big part of the work they do. Probation is also usually used to doing that. But it can be hard, especially for our coordinators, lawyers, or judges who are not necessarily used to hearing all these stories. You can take the role of the rescuer. You may, again, not have any feelings at all, become over-involved, have inappropriate physical contact, whether you realize it or not. Usually you realize it. You think about it later and go, God, why did I put my hand on the shoulder? Inappropriate disclosures, self-revelations, telling things to the participant as if you were the participant and they had to listen to you. Non-neutral interventions, again, incorrect interpretations of client behavior. So you've got similar things in each spot. What do you do when a participant relapses? We do a case autopsy to see how we failed the participant. So we've got some context for this now. This is our last section as we come into our last 10 minutes together. Let's take a look at another stressor, specifically trauma. What kinds of trauma do our drug court participants experience? We've got another QR code. See if you can put down 1 word, 2 words. What kinds of trauma do our treatment court participants experience? And of course, we know what these trauma are because they tell us, right? We get lots of information about our participants from all our different multidisciplinary perspectives. Yep. So we know when you're working with high risk, high need population, it is a severely traumatized population. Women in particular, even more traumatized if they're in drug treatment, significantly more likely to have had one, if not several traumas occur. Persons of transgender experience, lesbian, gay, bisexual individuals, men and women of color. Right, so we hear about these traumas, and you may say, listen, I really don't need to hear about this. And then a participant says, yeah, but I need to tell somebody. You say, well, go to treatment and tell them. And treatment goes, yep, that's our job. Gulp. Here comes another story. Right. So keeping in mind what trauma's effects are, when we talk about trauma, I like to think of it, and I simplify this because there's lots of literature on trauma, and that's much more complex. But SAMHSA uses the 3 E's, and I like to use them also. Trauma can be events and circumstances of the events. So a car crash occurs. You have the individual's experience of the event. For example, if you're in a car and there's a crash, it's a traumatic experience for you. So you have the event, a car crash, circumstances, you're in the car, you're driving, and that tells us that it's a traumatic event. If you're on the street corner and you see the car crash, it's not a direct experience, so there's less of an impact or less of an effect. If you're at home and see it on the news, you've got a further effect, right? So keep that in mind. How trauma impacts us is going to depend upon these 3 E's: the concept of the events and circumstances, how you experience them, and the long-lasting adverse effects on the individual. So we have trauma, what we experience, what we see, and what we hear. So for a breakdown of how individual traumas tend to occur less often to us. On the other hand, if you're a police officer, you probably experience significantly more trauma than other folks, direct trauma, right? Than other folks in our treatment team. Secondary trauma tends to be what we see. So say you're on that street corner and you see the accident, right? That's secondary trauma. Notice more secondary trauma occurs than direct trauma, generally speaking. And then we have vicarious trauma, the stories that we hear about. So we hear lots and lots of stories. That's why it's the biggest shape here. But its impact on us as on an individual level, right? Individual stories tend to be low. Problem is, if you hear 100 stories in a week, it can get to be so much so that it can be similar to a trauma or a secondary trauma in its impact on you. All right. So vicarious trauma is usually the stories that we hear, and we do hear a lot of them. So you've got what we experience as trauma, we've got secondary trauma, what we see, and then what we hear. And you can see which ones we tend to get more of. Vicarious trauma is the one that we need to think about, especially as a team, because they tend to occur and we don't take them seriously or we don't recognize them. So it's what you hear from a person who experienced the trauma. So you notice the images of the elephant. This all goes to the concept of that there's an elephant in the room. It's called vicarious trauma. And we need to make sure that we recognize that it's there. So some signs or symptoms of vicarious trauma. You've got irritability, aggressiveness, outbreaks in meetings, for example, difficulty managing your emotions. Did you ever have someone in staffing get upset and just kind of slam their hand on the desk or the tabletop and then walk out, and everyone kind of looks at each other and goes, what was that about? You know, sometimes it has to do with vicarious trauma, that we just hear so much. We get a cup full of trauma and it's overflowing. And if we don't recognize that the cup of trauma is overflowing and reduce the amount of trauma that's in that glass, then we're going to act out in different ways. We may shut down, fatigue, sleepiness, easily distracted, unfocused, losing a sense of meaning in life, hopeless about the future, relationship problems, can avoid work and interactions, destructive coping or addictive behaviors, decreased activities that you used to engage in and enjoy, and getting less of that. So to take care of the team, you want to make sure that you admit the existence of vicarious trauma, of the concept of transference, and of how powerful we feel about recurrence or relapse. You want to admit its existence, you want to talk about it, you want to recognize the impact, and you want to take steps to address it. So some suggestions, do reach out and talk to folks. Haven't you ever walked by somebody, even now in COVID days? I know many of us are at home working from home, but when you're in the office and you walk by somebody, you say, hey, how you doing? And they go, fine, and you just keep walking. Because you expect them to say fine, and they don't want to say anything but fine because they didn't want to address that their cup is overflowing, right? So when you do ask somebody, how are you doing? And they say, you know, not so good. You got to stop. Just checking in with you. Right. So check in with people. Do listen to them. Do ask folks how they're doing when traumas occur. So if you recognize them, you see that people are starting to act on by not showing up, by overreacting or underreacting in meetings and staffings, ask them what's going on. So trying to have a work to home transition so that you can have a safe place outside the workplace to be. I know that can be difficult sometimes. As first responders, especially, that can be a challenge to have, right? A place where the ability to separate out work from home. It's hard not to take these things home with us. Right? And yet we have to figure out ways to be able to do that so that we can have time free inside our heads to take care of ourselves. So things like sleeping, healthy eating, hygiene, exercise. These are all important aspects of wellness care, of taking care of yourself. Supportive connections with your family, friends, and coworkers. Not necessarily going out for a beer, though sometimes. Referral to organizations or supports that do peer support teams, employee assistance programs, sometimes a chaplain, sometimes doesn't always have to be a counselor. Right? It depends upon what cultural background someone has and what will be helpful to them. And encourage folks to talk about them either formally or informally. Informally to individuals. Go to lunch with folks. Find out how they're doing. Especially when things occur. So you've got awareness of your own reactions to trauma, to transference, to relapse. Finding a balance between work and home. Connection to other people. And I'm gonna, we have just enough time. We've got 3 minutes. We'll do a 1 minute, what's called box breathing exercise. It's actually something that's done by the Navy SEALs, believe it or not. It helps them to focus, relax, calm themselves down when they're incredibly anxious, whether it's before an event or some other experience. And what it is we're going to inhale, and I'll count everything off for 4 counts. We'll hold that breath for 4 counts. You'll exhale for 4 counts. You'll hold out the exhale for 4 counts, and then we'll just do it again. We'll do it for 1 minute and see how you feel. Okay, so everybody sit in your chair or wherever it is you're sitting at your workspace. You can press your back against the back of the chair, or you can sit forward on your sits bones. Those are the bones that you can feel right on the bottom of your tuchus, because you've been sitting for an hour and 15 minutes listening and interacting in a webinar. See if you can draw your shoulders up and back, and then down. Drop your chin just a little bit, not onto your chest or your neck, but just a little bit, so that you can feel the back of the neck go straight up into the air. And then take a nice deep breath in through the nose if you can. And then exhale. And let's take another nice deep breath. See if you can expand the belly as you inhale. So consciously make the belly bigger as you inhale. And then as you exhale, pull the belly back in. Just let it release. One more breath like that. Inhale. And then exhale a little longer than you inhaled. Now our next inhale, we're going to start the activity. So inhale, I'll count 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold the breath out. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale all the way out. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath out. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. And just let the breath come back to a normal pattern. And notice how you feel. Just notice what it feels like to do box breathing. Create a box of inhales and exhales and counting off from 4. And if you want to take a moment to write in the chat box how you feel. It'll be the last time I'll ask you how you feel. How did it feel to do box breathing? Feel back out. Shoulders. Some folks use it often. Relaxing. Shoulders less tense. Relaxing. Very relaxed. So the wonderful thing about breathing techniques is you carry your breath with you all the time. All the time. That's why when someone says, just take a deep breath in and exhale. It can be as simple as that, but there are a number of techniques like this which can help you relax, focus, take some of that trauma out of the overflowing glass. So I want to thank everybody. I think I went a couple minutes past. Hope it was engaging and worthwhile. We need to take care of ourselves in this field. There's a lot of pitfalls that can hurt in functionality and stop us from doing this work for a longer time. It's worthwhile work. I think you all know that based on your responses today. So good luck out there. Take care of yourselves and thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I know I will be going to the rest of my day relaxed and recharged. We will be sending out evaluation surveys to everyone. Thank you so much for such an informative training, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you, Joe. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jen. Thank you, everybody.